You fucking trolls. I'm looking out and more than half of the people sitting in here are simply here to troll me. And that's a thing of beauty, isn't it? You know, when people come out just to troll you, wait for you to make a mistake, wait for you to make a grammatical error so they can throw something at your fucking head. It's just magic. It's just magical, isn't it? I hear you. First off, I have to apologize partially for this, seriously. The demo gods have not smiled kindly upon me today. I made the proper sacrifices, but Verizon in its infinite wisdom has decided to cut off the LAN that my stuff runs on, so I can't actually show this to you live. But being the professionals that we are, we have slides. So I do have some stuff that I captured the other day that I'll walk you through for some of the stuff that the team is doing with data analysis. I wanted to do it live. It runs really cool live. But the two examples I have of pivoting are pretty damn cool anyway. I stole some stuff from a conversation of that guy in the front row right there, and I used it in my presentation for today. So if anything is wrong, it's his fault. All right? If it's brilliant, it's my responsibility, but if it doesn't go right and it looks wrong, it's his fault right there. All right? So remember that. On a serious note also, the stuff that I'm going to show you is interesting. My team, not my team, the advanced programs group at Intel, go in the back. Go sit your ass in the back, troll boy. He doesn't even. By the way, look right there. Doesn't even lift. Doesn't even lift. Doesn't even lift. Doesn't even lift. In all seriousness, the group that I'm with, the advanced programs group in Intel, we have access to the entire back end of McAfee. No homo. All right, it's not a gay back end. No homo. I told you it's not going to get any better. It's not going to get any better. But our goal and how we use the data of McAfee is very different than the labs uses the information in McAfee, right? The labs' goal at the end of the day is to create DAT files, right? Detect things like that, all right? We use the same data, but we use it for very different reasons. And I'm going to show you some of the analysis that we do, some of the pivoting through the data that we do, and some of the dashboards that we put together for, I think, is one of the cooler areas of hacking, which is certificates, signed malware. Malware actually signed with digital certificates. So I'm going to take you through a neat couple of use cases for that. That's where the example comes from. So if it's wrong, it's your fault. And if I get in trouble with Komodo, it's your damn fault. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten in trouble for saying something that is analytically correct and had the data to prove it, and you still get in trouble for it. That's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And then I'm going to take you through an exercise of something we just put together just called pivoting. Who's familiar with pivoting? If you're a real analyst and you're a real intelligence analyst, you know what pivoting is. All right, you pivot off of pieces of data to other pieces of data, and you ultimately build intelligence and information out of that. And I'm going to take you through some of the stuff that we're doing with that. And I think you'll find it very interesting. Again, I apologize that I couldn't do it live, but Verizon sucks. Blame them. It's not my fault. We have access to a ridiculous amount of data at McAfee and Intel, and I'm going to take you through some of the databases that we actually have access to. Who uses Yara? I'll give you an example, right? Yara, phenomenal. Who has access to 1 million samples per day new? Aside from you. You work for the same company I do. Put your hand down. All right. Now, think about this for a minute. You may have the best Yara signature in the world that may detect the nastiest piece of Japanese insert country of origin malware that is possible. But you know what you don't have? You don't have the data. All right? You don't have the sample set to actually run against it. We have that. We have more malware than anybody else does, with the exception of avtest.org out of Germany. All right? So my point in all of this is to say, not that we have all this great data, but that without lots of data, you really don't get to find and quantify very small actions, right? For instance, going back to the Yara example, let's say you have all of these APT1 Yara rules for detecting APT1 or other Chinese groups. Unless you have an order of magnitude of malware, you'll never get hits on any of that. So we're lucky in the sense that we have ridiculous amounts of malware on a daily basis. So I'm going to take you through how we bring a lot of that data in and the analysis that we actually perform on it. I'll show you some of the dashboards that we're working on. I'll show you some of the pivoting that we're doing. Feel free to ask questions along the way. Yell out if you need to. If you have questions, that's perfectly fine. All right. What this is a very simplified version of the different types of data that the Advanced Programs Group uses. So if you look in the center box in the top, that's all, that is all the different databases that comprise the McAfee backend, no homo. The one main source that we use for most of our analysis is called SampleDB. SampleDB houses every single piece of malware since malware began to get created, up until the last bit of malware we collected today. We're talking hundreds upon millions of samples of malware. We do most of our analysis off of that, but we also have access to things like Artemis and MAST, Trusted Source. If you're familiar with Trusted Source, it's got lots of reputation and IP address information, and we have root access to all of this. The labs guys use this to do DAT creation and false positing mitigation and things like that. We use this to perform analysis on. We use this to answer questions. We use this to quantify 0.0001% of how much Chinese malware is there today, how much Russian malware is there today. So we answer very different questions than the labs guys do. Quite frankly, most customers could give two craps about most of the analysis that we do. Very few customers really care about, you know, who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? When you really think about it, it's intelligence customers, banks, big aerospace firms, you know, those kinds of people who are the target of dedicated adversaries care about it, but most customers don't really care about it. We also pull in a ridiculous amount of external data sources. We use MaxMine, we use Shodan, we use a whole bunch of publicly available CNC feeds. We'll pull stuff from Zeus Finder, Spy Finder, all that kind of stuff. So to us, data is simply that. It's another feed for us to key in off of. So even though we do most of our work in SampleDB and MAST and Artemis, we also consider the external sources of data just as important. So that'll make sense in just a minute when I actually get to some of the dashboards. So we bring all of that stuff in and we do normalization on it and we do all other kinds of analysis. And then based upon customer requests, we produce dashboards, virtual visualizations, automated data processing, feeds, custom malware feeds, and all that kind of cool stuff. We also have our own analyst capabilities and things like that. But the point is the team looks at things with a different set of eyes than McAfee Labs does or Intel Labs does. We look at it with the adversary's eyes. Because the entire team is comprised of people who have a background in intelligence and adversarial work and everything else. Make sense? Cool. I don't care if it doesn't make sense anyway. I'm just placating you, just to hear myself talk. All right, so certificate intelligence. Who's familiar with the concept of digitally signed malware? All right? What do I mean by that? What do I mean by digitally signed malware? Hey! Pointed at him. Go to the back of the room. Sir. What does that make it when you take a malicious file and put a valid digital signature on it? What does it become? It becomes a whitelisted trusted file, right? All right. So that's kind of an interesting concept because if you look at whitelisting solutions, they take what? They look at keys, Komodo, VeriSign, GoDaddy, things like that. All right, if you're signed with a digital signature that's within the range that I consider acceptable, doesn't look at the file, and it lets it go on its merry way, right? That's kind of interesting to us, is the fact that it's an actual valid signature, but it's on a piece of malicious software. All right, so is the certificate malicious, or is the certificate abused? I don't really know the answer to that question, actually. But when you start looking at some of the dashboards that we put together, it becomes a little bit different. This is simply the top 50 digital certificates as viewed from the McAfee backend. What I mean by that is this. That is not the 50 most popular digital certificates out on planet Earth. That is the 50 most prevalent certificates that we find on malicious files from a historical point of view. Does that make sense? So it's not saying that's the 50 most important, it's saying it's the 50 most prevalent. Call off some names that you see up there. You see Komodo, right? Komodo, there's a trend there, right? What this thing shows, the bigger the bubble, the more pieces of malware are associated with X key, right? The redder the more, I take that back, the bigger the bubble, the more binaries are associated with that digital certificate. The redder the bubble, the more those binaries associated with that digital certificate are malicious. Make sense? So, you can have a small circle that's very red, you can have a small circle that's not so red, you can have a big circle that's very red, you can have a big circle that's not quite so red circle.
So are we creating all this malware to be true positive?
Get to that in a minute. That's a great question. I'll break that down in a second. The question is do we consider the ones that are actually flagged as malware to be truly malicious? Right? I'll get to that in just a second. That's where we get into the different colors and grades of red and stuff like that. And we'll get to that in just a second. But does this make sense? All right, so the bigger the circle, the more stuff that's actually associated with it. And when you look at, let's look at one in particular, right? And this is going to be difficult because I'm going to have to go up and I'm going to have to go down and have to go up and go down. All right, so this is keynote. All right, look at the subject name. Subject name is Ivan Kosten. Dirty binaries, 1.8 million motherfucking binaries. Okay? Clean, 0. Unknown, 58. Pretty sure those unknowns are pretty good. What can we say about any Komodo key with the subject name Ivan Kosten in it? If we know nothing else about the binary, if we only know about the digital certificate that is on said binary, what do we have a pretty good chance of being predictable right? All right. Do you happen to know what platform that binary runs on? Android. All right, that's an Android key. Ivan writes Android APKs. Ivan is bad for who's a dirty boy. How many girl? I don't know. So what the point is of almost all binaries that we have run across, they turned out to be malicious binaries. They're actually malicious APKs, going back to the question. In this particular case, every time we have run across a binary, or an APK, signed with Ivan Kosten's Komodo code signing CH2 key, they've been malicious. If you knew nothing else aside from that, you'd be able to make an intelligent decision. Now, if you didn't have access, just a second, Ryan, if you didn't have access to this amount of data, you would not actually be able to come to that conclusion. Now, there may be plenty of APKs out there signed with that key that are not malicious. That is certainly possible. However, none of them have shown up in our database. Ryan. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. That's a good point, though. So let's look at another one. So by the way, this doesn't mean Komodo keys in and of themselves are bad. This just means it's easy to abuse. This is a good one. This is a code sign key Komodo. What was that? What was it? Oh. I'm sorry. That's good entertainment. I apologize. This one comes from the subject name or subject header lcmail.ru. Are you? Russian. Look at the numbers associated with this key. And it's actually smaller than the first one I showed you. This has got a different distribution. This one's actually been on valid clean files. All right? So it's not 100% dirty, but it's pretty damn near close to being 100% dirty. It's 99.75. All right? How many of you have ever seen, when you click that APK to install or you click that file to install, what name do you see that pops up? Think about that for a minute. What name pops up when it says this key is signed by? Whose name is going to show up there? Depends. Generally, it's going to be mail.ru, thought underneath it. Every single person in here would probably, or I take that back, nobody in here but your mother or someone you know would probably click yes to that because it's signed by thought and has a known name, right? However, historically, almost 100% of the time, we have encountered that particular key. It's been dirty. Make sense? Sir?
Why don't they wash the environment?
Oh, don't even get me going. Don't even get me going on this. If I was to provide this feed to Thought on a daily basis, let's say, or Komodo on a daily basis, do you know what they would do? We'll talk about that later. The short answer to that question is yes, but. That's a very good question, because we don't have. Here's the problem: is if it's problematic. It's problematic. Here's the problem: this comes under policy, not an actual malicious detection, because the freaking thought key isn't malicious. The thought key is abused. It's not malicious. It's not like somebody collided them together and created a fake CERT MD5. That key is a valid C from a valid CA. It's just it's been used, and this is where it gets kind of squiffy, which is where generally guys like me get in trouble for calling stuff like this dirty. But, you know, we have the analytical evidence to prove it's dirty, right? Mickey? Of course you're here to troll me. Mm-hmm.
When you have 99.75% that sample, why is it not 100?
Because some of those files actually turned out to be clean.
How sure are you?
Very. I'm confident in the analysis capabilities of the back end that determine the 99.75 to be malicious. I'm confident in that. In the clean? Very. I'm actually more confident on the clean side than I am on the other side, because the actual clean feeds tend to be way more, and by the way, there's way more clean files that we get, clean feeds, on a daily basis than there ever are malicious. So that side of the house is actually way more precise than the gray and dark side of the house is. So yeah, believe it or not, the clean files.
Do you give it more scrutiny? When you say 200 supposedly clean samples out of a gazillion battles.
I would have to look into that. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, Nikki. But I'm going to say they're subjected to the same analysis process. Not to mention the fact that there's a feed that we get of clean files that is separate from the others. So it's not like it came in the same flow and go, oh, clean. No, it came in as a result of the clean feeds that we get on a daily basis with its own separate set of MD5s and everything else. So I'm completely confident in that. Make sense? Troll. Another one, right? This is another good one. I in particular like this one as well because of the names on there. And this is a VeriSign key. Who owns VeriSign? Never gets old. I'm not drawing any conclusions there. I'm simply saying that there's room for improvement here. But where's it going to go, right? If we could produce a feed of this very easily. How actionable is it? I don't know. I work for Intel Security. Intel Security produces whitelisting solutions. Has this research had an impact on that technology? You're damn right it has. Because our point of view is diametrically different than the whitelisting solutions. What's the whitelisting solution really only care about? What 20 keys should I let go? All right, but if we have data that proves, all right, in a 0.2% of the time that key may be malicious, you need to look past issuer name and subject name and expiration date and valid date, not or. It needs to be and. It needs to be a series of ands in there. If you were to look at any one of these keys in particular, like if you were to zoom in specifically, which I would if this was live, it would actually show you the valid sign date, the expiration date, creation date, and everything else. That's where it gets very, very interesting. That's where you need to have an order of magnitude of data. A lot of the most malicious keys that we only see in malware have had expiration dates in the year 3000. It's hysterical. All right? If you actually take the time, any binary that has an MD5, there's a little space that the certificate MD5 actually exists in. That maps back to a certificate MD5 database. That's where you get all the information from. And it has things like when it was created, when it was signed, is it valid, is it revoked. Just because the key is revoked doesn't make it invalid. Think about that for a minute. Just because the key is expired doesn't mean it's invalid. All right? It comes down to how the whitelisting solution or the OS handles it. And data like this, even though we can analytically prove 3% of Komodo keys are bad, doesn't really matter. Because it's only a small drop in the bucket. Here's the thing that you and I, here's the thing you and I were talking about the other day, right? We're talking about Tugu, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly. So without going into too much detail, we're having a conversation about this particular subject. If you were to actually do a search on digital certificate Tugu, you would find something like that. Keys, not just from GoDaddy, not just from the GoDaddy specific authority, but lots of different ones, lots of different styles. This one particular key, 512 pieces of all that's been off the number. When you get right down to it. I'm going to take it through this particular data point in just a second so you can see what I mean. When we actually start pulling in additional types of binaries and stuff like that. But you have a very small statistical sample that are not malicious. So again, you know, you got this stuff. It's clearly your 1.5. Doesn't register. It's just ridiculous when you get right down to it. And these things are as nasty gets. You find a lot of Tugu on fake AV. You find it on a lot of Trojans, things like that. But if you dig into the key, this is actually what the breakdown of that particular key is. So again, we pull this right from the sample database. So it's not just 512,000 samples. 512,000 samples that actually break down like that. And this goes back to what Ryan was saying for that. They're at a variety of dirty levels. What assumed dirty means is this. Who's an active customer? You know what Artemis is? Right, Artemis is this thing that we have that wants off behaviors. Alright, it rates things via assumed behaviors. The more behaviors it exhibits that are dirty, the higher its dirty rating is. So you see things like assumed dirty, 32, 33, 34, higher levels of dirtiness until finally it's a Trojan. Trojan isn't assumed dirty, it's actually doing something. Yeah. So those are actually the classic patterns. But every single time, it's turned out the next thing has turned out to be extremely malicious. There you see things like the sign date, the expiration date, and the digital certificate. So you can see it's actually a true valid key with the expiration date. And we also bring in a histogram when we actually see it out in the wild. These big spikes actually turn out to be fake AV campaigns. So when there are big fake AV campaigns going on, we see a huge spike in the amount of binary files out in the wild signed with Tugu. Pretty interesting, actually. Make sense? Any questions on that? Bigger problem than most people would think it is. If you're a member of closed mailing lists, occasionally a topic like this comes up is, oh, we ran into a Komodo key, and it's bad. We think it's bad. What do we do about it? You ran into one Komodo key? I ran into the one Komodo key that's signed 512 pieces of malware. You know, where are you looking for your data? Was there a question, sir?
Yeah, when the malware is coming out, is the sample set set up so that you're looking at it at that one particular point in time, and that's when you see that or is it spread across time?
Gotcha. That particular view is a historic view, so it's cumulative over time. That 512 is not of any one particular day. It's of all the times that we have seen it up to and including that day. So it's not the dynamic flow as it comes in moment to moment. It's up until that point in time. Make sense? Cool. But we run into this stuff all the time. Any questions on this so far? Sir? Oh, Bart. Troll. That's something that we can't determine based upon this type of analysis because we're solely seeing X number of keys on X number of binaries. Bart was asking the question, is it possible the key was compromised and the key was stolen? Certainly, it's possible that that's the case. If that's your question. But there's no way for us to tell that from this type of analysis. And quite honestly, there's no point in stealing a key. It costs $29 to have one made. Go online. Go to GoDaddy. Go to Google GoDaddy digital certificate. By the time I get done talking, you could have created yourself a key. You know, and sign all the malware that you want. And it's signed with a GoDaddy key. There's no point in actually going through the trouble of stealing the key or colliding the key unless you're going for a Microsoft key or a Micron key or a top 20 vendor key like a McAfee or something like that. You know, if you want to go for that kind of system level, you're going to have to pay big bucks to actually get the key. And there's been instances, troll boy, there's been instances of keys like that having been stolen. There's Microsoft keys we've seen used one time in a pool of 100 million samples. So it happens, but it's never going to happen again. Or at least you're not going to see that key on another piece of malware because it's going to be used for an attack that's exceptionally targeted. At least in our experience, that's generally what's going to happen. What do you want, Mickey?
Have you ever seen this?
No.
Okay. So you ever seen instances where someone put in dollars to sign a lot of malware with
All the time. All the time. It's more prevalent on the Android side of the house than it is on the Win PC side of the house. We run into the problem is bigger than most people realize in the Android world. Why?
You calculated the amount of money required to invest in buying?
No, haven't really. But it's interesting because you run into some of the same registration names when you start looking at a lot of keys over time. You know, we're not just looking at one or two keys. We're actually looking at every single key on binaries in Android's history and stuff like that. So we run into the same registration information. So the problem with the Android platform is you can create your own test key or dev key and make it look like a fully authenticated valid key. It's problematic. But we've never done that kind of analysis, though. That might be an interesting thing to look at. Yes, sir. Gotcha. The maliciousness of the file is unrelated to the maliciousness of the piece of malware itself. Gotcha. 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 I haven't seen this change greatly over time. This dashboard has existed for us for over a year now, and I haven't seen the top 50 change greatly. I've only seen the top 50 grow in size. And that's all, I think that's only because of established history. It's easy to figure out which keys get abused because the information is generally public. You can map back to certificate MD5s and pull your own data to do a lot of this stuff. So it's fairly easy to come to the conclusion of whose CAs should you actually be using. If you want to hide within the noise, you get a thought or Komodo key. It's really as simple as that. Name yourself this guy. Yeah, name yourself Ivan. There's another key that's really prevalent called Ivan Ivan. You know, he just uses two first names, Ivan Ivan. It's on millions of samples of malware. It is so ridiculously easy to do because unless your policy is actually going past just Komodo and into subject name and expiration date and is it expired or is it revoked, you're not really doing what you think you're doing. And my experience has been that most policies don't go that deep. They simply go, Komodo, let it go. Oh, this one. Let it go. They actually don't take in revocation into account. They don't take validity into account. They don't take expiration into account. And hence, you have this. Is there a question on this side? Yeah, sir.
Have you worked with authorities to track payment commonalities across?
Not at this point. Bang your head against that wall, and you will see what it's like giving certificate authorities feedback on how their certificates get abused out in the wild. And once you have a nice cranial injury, you'll kind of understand where a lot of this has taken us. It really has. Because where do they make their money from? Selling service. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's a combination. It's a combination of things. It's a combination of keys. Even though keys are revoked, they can still run. That's a problem that exists outside the CA itself. That exists actually in the OS and how the OS still allows revoked keys to run. So you've got multiple fails, sadly enough. You know, it just doesn't come to revoking the key. Innotech. Anybody remember Innotech? There was an issue with Innotech recently, right? That their key was used to sign some pretty nasty malware. It was revoked a long time ago. A long time ago, and it still runs. So welcome to the jungle. What can I tell you? All right, give you an example of how we pivot through some data. Let me bring this down here so I can stop. At least know a little bit about what I'm talking about. The next series of slides are going to walk you through what we kind of stupidly call GuerillaPivot, because it allows us to pivot through a lot of different macro data. All the stuff you saw in the previous slides is almost all what is our sample database, our main repository of samples and certificates and stuff like that. The stuff I'm going to walk you through here is actually a combination of sample database, maximize, trusted source, open source collections of information, a little bit of show data thrown in, some CNC bot feeds, some Zeus Finder, a whole lot of other stuff. And the point is, is to kind of start connecting dots. So instead of just looking at a binary, if that binary has a piece of information, then how can we pivot off of that piece of information, right? What else can we learn about that particular binary? All right, so this is kind of a pie chart. And we're going to come back to this graphic a little bit later. But we started out with that particular binary. And we have some basic information about it. When it was last seen in the last 24 hours, so it's seen one time in the last 24 hours. Total times it was seen in the square enterprise. Basic information like that that you would think that you would have. And we can track when we see binaries out in the world, we think of that. However, during replication, we looked at the malware, and inside the malware itself, those two IP addresses. So the malware is talking to those two IP addresses. All right? Now, you pull in some maximum information, maybe those values you want to. We pull in how many domains each of those IP addresses have associated to it. That one has 738, that has 629. How many related items it has? And of course, all right? So we're going to start building out information. So we're not just saying, oh, this binary talks to this IP address. We want to know how much information exists out there about that binary and those different IP addresses. Make sense so far? So we dig into it a little bit more. Did that change? That didn't change, did it? Sorry about that. There we go. So this one expands out the IP addresses into the actual domains that are in there. And if you can do a data analysis and introspect long enough, what are those first 25 domains in the data book? Domain generated algorithms, right? They're all easy, right? You know where that's coming from. Next portion of it is the API uses that are open, right? So we pull some stuff again, that's the one from Maxline. How many subdomains are associated with it? Where those actual domains are. It starts building out a better case than just that's an MP5 that talks to those IP addresses. I want to know every bit of information that's actually being extruded by that piece of malware and where it's going. I did it again, didn't I? There we go. What? There's a big difference between the quality of the data that you actually get from it. Maxline is phenomenal, and it's inexpensive. Buy a copy of Maxline. It's well worth the information. And it's not our only source as well. It's one of others. You run into some problems with GeoIP every once in a while. It's better not just to have one source. It's better to have a couple of sources, but it's phenomenal. Really phenomenal. We also bring in grammar information, and of course, we're working on that. We do that for a very obvious reason. What if something is running ProFTP and MySQL and an Apache server? What conclusion can you draw about set up the address? Aside from the fact that bad in the dumbass. What is it? It's on. What is it generally used for? Hosting malware, DDoS, things like that. So we want to bring in all of that information to be able to say, all right, set IP address, aside from being distributing malware, also is probably hosting other malware. Make sense? All right. What, Ron?
That's all passive. It's not active.
That is correct. That's a good point. So we're not actually divulging our activity to the adversary when we're doing this. We're actually bringing it in. We use a lot of showdown stuff. We use a lot of showdown queries. We do a lot of additional queries. So it's not like we're port scanning that IP address. What?
Much like not doing leg day, you don't do mic day, no one can actually hear you on the video later on.
I don't care. And by the way, last year, Adrian, how long did it take you into my does CrossFit. He does CrossFit. So moving on. Obviously, we also bring in who is information. This is so commonly picked, it's almost not worthwhile bringing it in. But sometimes it can be interesting, and it can also lead as a data point. If you run into this same who is information across multiple registrations, every 1% of the time you'll get some valid results from it, but it doesn't really matter. But it's just there because it's part of what we bring in. Now we start getting interesting because we start figuring out what else is going on IP address that we got that MP5 on. So this particular one is hosting other external samples. When you see what else this particular IP address is hosting, you'll kind of get a good picture of what it's actually doing rather than it's just IP address 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right? Anybody familiar with that? Can anybody read that? If you have a drink more of the bourbon, it's available in the front row. Anyway, this is a very commonly used drop zone. A lot of data gets extruded to it. A lot of tools are housed on it. All right? So this particular MP5 is talking to and is available from that address. That is important when you start bringing in additional pieces of information, like what else is out there? How is it categorized? When was it last checked? There's also that 27 IP address associated with it. So guess what? This IP, this address, this URL, is going to change tomorrow to one of those 27 other IP addresses. All right? So blacklisting the IP address is an exercise of utility, although it's a good idea. But because a lot of the stuff is DGA and everything else, unless you have this kind of information behind you, you're going to be making decisions that are based upon incomplete data at best. Make sense?
The blacklist of FQDNs.
What name?
The FQDNs. Domains.
What about? My point is domain blacklisting one or the other is the wrong way to go.
It's always the known path.
That's exactly right. But the point is we can glean an awful lot of information if we actually have access to what we're looking at. Then we move into the area of what other pieces of malware are associated with said IP address, and then it also becomes very, very interesting. So again, since we have millions upon millions of samples in an active database, any other sample that is known to have talked to or been distributed by that IP address shows up here. So we can then say, Chinese malware on that site. It's a lot of Russian malware that's on that site. Think of FBI, put this on there. Or you can make better decisions about what to do. We bring in the classification information simply because we can get a better idea of how that file was protected in the first place. Again, this is cloud-based, garbage-based, some of them are unknown, some of them are assumed clean. What are the more interesting ones you see up there? One jumps out, maybe. Aside from that one, that's a good one. The second one was Get Clean. They actually have one of our support tools on the site to actually clean an infected system before they drop their malware on it. That's kind of fascinating. They've got all the reverse lab tools there, and this goes on for pages of malware that's available from this particular IP address. And again, this took us 5 minutes to run the scan on because we had access to all of this information in the back-end database. This, their site. Make sense? Cool. Some of the other stuff that's actually available in there, associated downloads. This is a different page from the other one. This is additional malware that was known to be associated with stuff that's on the previous page. So again, we don't just look at what malware is there, but we also actually bring in what malware is associated with the malware that was on the page previous. You understand what I mean by that? So this site is distributing this particular toolkit. These are related to that particular toolkit. So it may not be distributing them directly, but we bring in all the stuff that is potentially associated with it, building out the story of activity. Make sense? Cool. Detection information, just because I always deal with pro detection information. I wanted to explain what this map actually means. This is the map actually from the first page. The red dot, the one red dot there, and one very red dot there,
malware actually. Everything else is associated. All right? So it's either talking to those drop zones or it's getting additional data from all of those drop zones. That one particular piece of malware has a history of talking to all of those different addresses. All of those associated pieces of malware also have a history of talking to a subset of those IP addresses. This is extremely valuable for profiling out who, what, when, where, why, and how. So if you think the data doesn't exist to actually correctly identify adversarial activity, you would be incorrect. The information is actually there. This is stuff that's drawn from McAfee and from a lot of open source information, and it's just added together by people who kind of know what they're doing, with an eye for identifying where things are coming from. So this is very interesting because a lot of these will turn out to have separate pivot points. If this was running live, we could actually pivot off of any of these. So this has got 7 additional pivots on it. This has got 1 additional pivot on it. 7, 1, 12, 1. The green ones are external samples. So the green dots are other pieces of malware that are either hosted there or available there on that particular website. So lots of very cool information. And they actually tell a pretty cool story. So you can go from one specific piece of information, one MD5, not very interesting. But if you do your analysis correctly and you connect your dots correctly and you have shitload of data, you can do some pretty cool stuff.
Metric or imperial?
What?
And metric or imperial?
Controlled. See, I wasn't getting controlled enough from the left-hand side of the room. I appreciate that. Any questions on this? Pretty straightforward? What? My left. That's right. So what are we doing with some? What are we doing with some of this data? I'm sorry, that was rude of me, and I shouldn't have said that. So for those who have actually asked, we are for those people who are asking, do we produce these as daily feeds? Yes, we actually do. But to get any of these feeds, or to get us to deliver a daily customized feed to you, doesn't cost money, it costs data. All right? You've got to have something to share. All right? Meaning, you've got to have a feed, or you've got to have a list, or you've got to have something else that we don't have, or has something different than what we have to get. We're not about money, we're about sharing, but we want you guys to contribute to what we're doing. Just like we will take any Yara signature you have, and we will run it against our daily corpus. I will give you whatever results that we actually get from it. The same thing holds true for this. If you're looking for advanced malware feeds, or you're looking for a daily malicious service, or the actual MD5 of the binary that service is associated with, we can produce stuff like that. But you got to have something to contribute. It depends. If I like you, maybe. If I don't like you, fight me. But you don't even live, bro. You don't live, bro. You don't live. You don't live, bro.
You don't even.
You can't hang out with torture patients. Case by case basis. And again, it's not to say it's so super secret or anything. That's not the point. We're generally happy to share, but we want to make what we do better. We want to do better analysis. We want to have better feeds. We want to be able to do more pivots and stuff like that. So what I would ask is this: we can create all kinds of cool feeds. We do them now. One of the best things that we produce daily is the advanced malware, because we can key off Yara signatures, and it's automated. You know, think about that. You've got 10 of the best Yara signatures in the world. All right, running that against 400,000 new samples every single day might be beneficial, you think? And we can produce things like that. It's automated. It's already built. We do the same thing for malicious search, sign malware, for malicious APKs. There's so many different things. The sign malware is very interesting. It's very, very interesting. So we can produce a lot of stuff like that. The only thing I ask is what you have to contribute back. Any questions? Sir? I can't tell you how often lab runs samples and stuff like that. I honestly don't know. But every once in a while, the entire corpus does get redone. But here's the thing: is once detection is actually in the DATs for a particular binary file, labs are done with it. They're done. It's in the DATs. It's covered. So my point is, is their onus to go back and retest and better classify things is down here. That being said, we bring in the same samples they do, and we continually retest to reclassify samples. So we've just got a bit of a different point of view on there. So we've seen sample history change over time.
Well, not just political, but also
Sure. Oh, sure. Absolutely. You know, a lot of times samples will get back tested, and you'll see something that was judged clean that found to have Trojan code in it or bad cert or whatever. So yeah, absolutely. New knowledge does go back and change previously identified samples, which is why we continually retest samples. Again, you know, labs got a very specific point of view, covering the malware every single day. I don't necessarily go back and test and stuff like that, but we try to do that. And we try to influence their roadmaps with things like certificates and tables and stuff. But we can show them, look, you know, this is this huge flow of badness that you have, or this huge flow of goodness. 1% of the time is going to be something really bad. I don't mean just bad, I mean adversarial bad. And you need to be able to take that into account. So Komodo has an established history of 1% of the time, I'm not picking on Komodo for a reason, but how do you factor that in how you're whitelisting? And that's how we try to get back to what they're doing. So it's not just, you know, we're so smart, we've got to do that. You know, the point is to be better able to identify the bad stuff in a big flow of good stuff. So we try to get back to this in the same way as possible. Yes, sir. Dude, I don't even live on it. I don't really live. When you go through the capital of launch networks, you get the same all the user vulnerability of that is the answer to that question is yes. We were just recently asked to put some of this stuff actually be on Nitro. So the answer to that is not currently, but it will be available either through Nitro or through PBO in the future. By the way, if my line from Verizon comes live before I leave on Sunday, I will absolutely put it into the actual dashboard and send this stuff live. And you get a better idea of how it will fit in Nitro and you go very well. So it's roadmap. I couldn't give you a period of time, 2077. I'm not trying to so unfortunately you need a lot of so we do things like use up we're working on it. We just showed all of this stuff to our worldwide CTO and it asked us to we turn around and CTO and and you know, say no to that. And we say, yes, sir, you know, we're going to help you through the engine stuff, and we get under cross-site community, we go to cross-reference for intelligence. You're talking about classification. Basically, yes, so we are moving in that direction. The problem we want to do is, one of the reasons it's difficult to show sensitivity lines, customer data will sometimes show up in there. And if you're not that customer, that's not a big deal. But if you're the audience and you're that customer, that's a pretty big deal. So it can be problematic. We don't filter our dashboard because where we sit with those dashboards, we're the only one that actually looks at it. We'll get it. We'll get to it. We have to figure out how certain things and kind of things are figured out. But, you know, like I said, when your CEO asks you to turn something over to the CEO, I feel like you're not going to do that. So I can't give you time here. We'll see. We talked about feedback and our sample feedback. What's your feedback and the sample set this large? We're talking about run-of-the-mill campaign. Wow. None of that actually. It's a different set of questions. Very different. Our goal is to quantify certain adversarial groups, and this is a setting something to do that. So when we look at the 100,000 that are in there today, I want to know specifically which 5% of those are AAP1, 2% of those are AAP2, which ones are Japanese, which ones are Korean, which ones are. That's our goal at the end of the day. So our goal isn't classification, it's identification. This is our stepping stone to that. So it's, I hear you with the pain pyramid, but we have a classification pain pyramid that we're trying to do. That's our goal. We're ultimately trying to do that. I mean, curious, I'd be curious if you have a question? Yes, it is. not with some of this, but there's other stuff in international that's specific. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's hard right for one of those standards though sometimes. So it's so difficult. But the answer to the question is yes. Sticks is on the roadmap. It's on the roadmap. And you know, I don't have such a
This is very easy.
Was that on video? Was me giving the audience the finger on video?
They can't hear you though.
Excellent, but they can't hear me. So I can just be using sign language. All right, like I said, if my feeds come live and I can show this to you guys live until Sunday, I'm happy to show it to you live. We also have a dashboard that's actually an offensive dashboard. That's actually geared toward putting stuff together from an offensive point of view. Not just offensive, but versus action. So, Hollywood boy, I'll be down to the bar, thank you all for your time. And